now recognize Mr. Baird for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, as a scientist, I recognize that if you're even trying to replicate a study exactly, you could, because of factors being slightly different, come to a different conclusion. And so I just want to make us recognize that that is a factor in doing research. But Dr. Pilkey, in 2017, the National Academy's report on fostering integrity in research recommended that the science community should put more focus on detrimental research practices, including failure to share the data and misleading use of the statistics and abusive supervision. How should the federal agencies address the broad range of detrimental research practices as part of the scientific community?
Yeah, the National Academy study, Fostering Integrity in Research, focused on research misconduct, which is very well understood. There's clear policies put in place across the federal agencies. But detrimental research practices, failure to provide data, p-hacking, other examples of dodgy research practices often fly under the radar. I think it's essential to recognize that not only are the high-line fabrication, fraud, plagiarism issues in science, but practices that lead to inconsistent or unreliable scientific results. It would be important for the federal agencies to come up with policies and procedures to deal with detrimental research practices. And as we just heard, most significant there is a failure to release data that accompanies peer-reviewed or federal studies such that other independent researchers can replicate or attempt to replicate those results. That's important. It's down in the weeds, a little bit more wonky, but I would argue just as important as the high-level issues of scientific integrity.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, do you have any thoughts in that regard?
Some of the agencies we looked at included research misconduct as part of their scientific integrity policies. Others treated that separately, but there is clear guidance from OSTP, I think back in 2000, that lays out the process for dealing with research misconduct. So it's a subset related to scientific integrity, but it's not what we focused on in our report. We're looking more at the suppression of science or the how researchers were being influenced or censored.
Thank you. And Dr. Pilkey, back to you again. The EPA Science Integrity Office recently held a stakeholder meeting. According to press reports at that meeting, the EPA Chief Science Officer said that many inquiries and complaints were instances of employees confusing science and policy. She is quoted as describing the complaints as, "My science says this, and the policy ended up over there. How should we implement science integrity procedures that help scientists understand this difference?"
Well, as someone who's run a program at the University of Colorado training PhD scientists and engineers to understand the policy process, it is absolutely essential to provide training and understanding that science does not dictate policy results. Science informs, it can help to shape understanding of policy options, but it is I think in my field, in academia, a professional minefield to think that your expertise leads to knowledge that then compels a particular course of action. As you have said in the opening statement, there's different interpretations about the significance of science, what it means for different courses of action. And I think this is part of becoming an expert, a government expert as a scientist, understanding the clear differentiation between what decision makers do and how they use evidence, scientific integrity, and then the role played by those people who produce that evidence and science to inform the political process.
Thank you. In your observation of other science agencies, did you notice any of the others who do a particularly good job with educating employees on scientific integrity? And did you identify any rules of thumb that might want to see agencies follow in educating their staff and maintaining open lines of communication? 33 seconds.
Sure. Yeah, 7 of the 9 agencies we looked at did take steps to educate their staff, including having required training, mandatory training, or handbooks. And so those are a variety of practices. But there were 2 agencies that did not have any sort of process or activities to educate staff, just have their policies on their website. So that's why we believe there should be some educating, either through training or other means of the staff, so that everyone is clear on what the policies are, which is, I think, goes to the other point you were making, that it's really important that if there is a disagreement on a scientific integrity issue, it should be able to be investigated, through a process that's known to staff and that can be adjudicated fairly. And I think if that's transparent, then we can be more certain that the process is working.
Thank you, and I'm out of time. I yield back.